Before I start, I'd like to make two clear points. First of all, I'm taking it as read that this audience believes that to slaughter without stunning is actually harmful to animal welfare. And secondly, I want to differentiate between religious slaughter and non-stun slaughter. These are not the same thing, and I want to separate them out very clearly right at the start. If we're going to have what happened next, we have to have a starting point, and my starting point is the presentation that was made here 2 years ago. Why shouldn't a consumer know and choose? And at that point, we presented very clearly a drive to try and influence the outcome of European Directive 1099/2009, which was up for implementation in the UK and should have been implemented in January of this year. We presented the BVA position, which is very clear that all animals should be stunned before slaughter, and if that wasn't possible, then the meat should be labelled to enable informed choice. The latter part, the labelling, we sort of lost very quickly in the political bartering in Europe. That fell out as an option at that particular time. And so we were really left with the drive to have all animals slaughtered without stunning. However, DEFRA made it clear that they would not prohibit religious, that is, non-stun slaughter. And so we were left with how do we take forward this agenda that as Carl has said, had been hanging around for a long, long time. And my last slide at that presentation was simply lobby, lobby, lobby. Unless we as a BVA organisation and individuals actively lobbied for a change in the legislation, we were not going to progress. Moving on, the next chapter that involved me was I invited to write a viewpoint article in the Vet Record in May of last year. And the BMJ, in its wisdom, chose to feature this in its news release, and so it got pretty mega press coverage at the time, which is actually great because that's what we wanted. We wanted the issue out in the open and discussed clearly. The reaction was really quite overwhelming, particularly from the Muslim and Jewish communities who saw this as an attack on religious freedom and failed to appreciate the difference between religious slaughter and non-stun slaughter. And Sean, again, dabbled in this, more than dabbled, got actively involved in a very lively TV debate. TB debate is something totally different. But no doubt he would take part in that one as well. What interested me was the reaction from the veterinary profession, and it was very clear that many vets really had put this to one side and it wasn't active in their thinking. And they began to take an interest and began to lobby. And on top of that, a very considerable response from the farming community, many of whom were not aware that their animals were actually going into an abattoir and being slaughtered without stunning. So if we go back to the quality assurance debate, I think there's a good case for having included in these elements of what happens after the farm, including transport and slaughter. And actually that might be one way to tackle the contentious labelling issues. Coincidentally, or perhaps because of the Viewpoint article, the Food Standard Agency did actually release the latest tranche of data on non-stun slaughter. And they compared what had been slaughtered in 1 week in September in 2011, and we were able to look at a similar period in 2003. And if we look at kosher stunning alone, or kosher slaughter, it's clear there is a significant drive upwards, with the increase in cattle slaughter of up by nearly 80% in that 8-year period. And of course, for kosher slaughter, none of that is stunned. For halal slaughter, there's a big difference between the overall halal kill at 154,000 sheep, for example, and that proportion is not stunned at 28 or 29,000. But again, the figures are showing not just the size of the problem, but the way the issues are changing, with sheep and goat kill increasing by 70% in that 8-year period, and poultry kill by threefold, by 300%. If we extrapolate that for a full year, it's clear that about 4% of the national kill for cattle is halal, 50% of the sheep is halal, and 30% of poultry. But these are not the same as the non-stunned component. And if we look at the non-stunned component, it relates to 3% for cattle, 10% for sheep, and 4% for poultry. Now, I personally, as an FSA former board member, was disappointed that the FSA in its press release chose to relate this as a relatively low number of animals, and quoting the 3, 10 and 4%, forgetting that these figures related to 1.5 million sheep or 32 million poultry. So we've got to quantify the numbers, not just look at the percentages. The next part of the chain was I was asked to do a webinar for BVA. And we had about 300 or thereabouts vets listening into that. And again, this focused the mind of the veterinary profession of how do we take this issue forward. And I suggested we might use the same sort of principles that we do for animals in research: replace, refine, and reduce. And simply we could replace non-stunning with stunning by making it mandatory, or by improving the dialogue with religious communities to accept stunning. We could refine the non-stun process by looking at post-cut stunning, where the cut is actually made, and improving veterinary supervision at the time of slaughter. And we could reduce non-stunning by restricting the use of that meat to the religious communities that were demanding it, and by labelling all meat from non-stunned animals so that the consumers could make their own choice. And these are all areas that the BVA has been actively working on in the last 12 or 24 months. This as an issue remains high on the BVA agenda. It's a constant topic for the Ethics and Welfare Group and comes to Council. And clearly the position of the BVA has not changed. All animals should be stunned before slaughter. And if we look specifically at some of the BVA actions, we did respond to the consultation from the UK governments to implement Directive 1091. There's been subsequent correspondence with all UK administrations relating the concern of the profession about non-stun slaughter. There's been active liaison with stakeholders, including NFU, RSPCA, to try and get a common starting point to go forward with a united front. There's ongoing lobbying with MPs, and that's led to meetings with ministers, most recently in March of this year. And we're currently seeking international support from sister veterinary organisations to build a united approach to the topic. Directive 1099 will actually not be implemented until autumn of this year, when we're expecting welfare of animals at the time of killing regs to be introduced. It is very clear, though, that DEFRA will not include in that animals must be stunned before slaughter. But ministers have indicated that after the implementation of the regulations, they might consider issues such as post-cut stun or some of the measures that we have discussed that would actually improve animal welfare. So, we're actually back to where we were 2 years ago, when I stood here and said, we must continue to process this to take the issue forward. We must lobby, lobby, lobby. And actually, I've just used the same slide again. We still need to lobby, lobby, lobby. Unfortunately, unlike Sean, I can't report that we've had considerable success with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Questions for Bill, please. Same format as last time. Yes, please. Again, names and where you come from, and I'll try and create a list.
Hi, Asif Rao from Eurocorti Lamps. Just to comment on labeling and reduction issue, although there are many other issues to comment as well. In principle, we do support labeling, but we do not support the narrow-minded view being taken at the moment just based on someone's faith. If you are going to label, then you have to consider the whole life of the animal, not just last few seconds. And reduction, for your information, there's a growing demand, as we discussed earlier during the lunch, of slaughter without stunning across the Europe. If we want to improve the welfare of animals at the time of slaughter, we need to work with the religious communities. And the only way is to accept slaughter without stunning, which is legal in the European Union anyway, and to work with the communities how we can improve, like training, maybe how we can reduce the time to lose consciousness, issues like that. Because at the moment, it's nothing happening. Since last 3 decades, we have been just presenting different presentations, nothing is happening, because we are not moving in the right direction. We have to work with the communities to improve the welfare of the animal. That's my point.
Thank you, Asif. I think we've discussed this issue before, and I think we have many common aims that we would like to introduce stunning, but where that is not possible, we want to improve animal welfare. And I think you're absolutely right. We must liaise more with the religious communities to either get these communities to accept stunning, or where that is not possible, to accept the non-stun slaughter process to be as humane as possible. And I welcome the opportunity that we would have to work more closely with you.
Thank you. Christopher Waters, please.
Christopher Waters, latterly chairman of Fork, soon to retire from the Royal Veterinary College, and now a sheep farmer. I wish to make one point and ask you a question, Bill. First of all, and the point is this, that I think that you have to respect the rights of all equally in a democracy as we are today. So if food was labelled as such that it was stunned and it was suitable for those of particular persuasion, then whatever persuasion they happen to be, then they could make a choice. Could they not? So if they happen to require that it was stunned before slaughter and it was labelled as such, then they could make their choice. If they happen to require that it wasn't stunned before slaughter, they could make their choice. Secondly, I was called a Nazi in 2005 when I went to see a slaughter of cattle without stunning first, and I've never been called a Nazi before or since by this particular group. It was a memorable visit, of course, on 2 accounts. One by being called a Nazi, and 2 by seeing the cattle, which have vertebral arteries that cannot be cut by the exquisitely sharp knife, being slaughtered without stunning. And the question is this: what example should you or anybody set? Lobbying is one way through it, another is to take a particular position. What example should you or any others take?
I'm sorry, Chris, I didn't quite catch what that question was.
What example should you or any other person take? For example, do you ever go to an Indian restaurant? If you do, what food do you eat there? Now, it's not you personally, but what example should we take?
I think your question rolls into the point you were making at the start about people should have an informed choice, and I think that would apply to us if we were buying meat for ourselves. But I think what is clear is that many people do not have an informed choice. I think the market has grown for purposes other than religious preference. It is now the case that many bulk buyers of food, whether it's caterers, whether it's local authorities, actually choose to buy halal meat, for example, because it's easier than running 2 separate streams. Now, that's not to say the halal meat is all non-stunned. The difficulty is you just don't know. So there is growth out with the religious communities. And I think it's beholding on all of us to actually ask the provenance of the meat we are doing. So I think we as individuals, as well as lobbying, we should be asking, well, not only is this chicken free range, but how was it slaughtered? And so we are all personally involved in making these decisions, taking these actions.
Right, I've got a list as long as my arm, literally, on this one at the moment, and we are pressed for time. If I might, Bill, I'm going to take two together now because I've got the microphone together up there with two people. So Ian first, and then Heather.
Bill, thanks for that presentation. You're continuing, and the BVA is continuing work on this important issue. Lobby, 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 absolutely. But you may well come up, and I'm sure you have, against the barrier that a veterinary colleague of mine did in discussion with their local MP, who would not enter into a discussion on this because they felt it had racist overtones. They did not even want to begin to start to discuss it.
Can I answer that one first?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's absolutely right. I think politically this is not a vote winner for anybody. But I had an interesting dialogue with one peer, not our present peer, who accused me of being anti-Semitic. And this was because I was suggesting that if the Jewish community would actually eat the hind quarter of the meat, then we could overnight reduce by 50% the number of cattle that were slaughtered for the kosher trade. And when I challenged this attitude, the shutters came down. There was to be no more discussion. And you're quite right, it's very difficult in some cases to actually engage in the dialogue. And I'm delighted to see Asif here because he is prepared to have dialogue.
It was just a comment, really, in that I think on a lot of these issues, there is quite a lot of commonality between your presentation and also Sean's presentation previously.
No, he was successful.
When, no, but when we're talking about a ban, I've done quite a bit of work on trade issues across Asia, and we see a range of cultural, very strong cultural influences, for example, in issues like rhino horn and ivory trade. Unless you reduce the market demand, the ban will not work, a ban will never go away. And I think that that's one of the issues that was alluded to in terms of the exotic, the wild bird directive as well, is that there has to be continuous education and engagement, and it's all part of that process. And I'm not saying that the two are mutually exclusive, but I think it's quite easy to lobby for a ban because that's legislation, but in the long term, it can drive an industry underground, and it's not necessarily effective.
Can I again respond?
Well, the microphone's going over to Kat,
right.
Yes, quickly.
I think that's quite right. One of the things that came out after the webinar was the number of vets who made inquiries locally to find what was happening in their issue. And the demand was there, as I said, for local authorities, for schools, to buy the halal product for simplicity, for ease of operation, for economic reasons. And education has to start from the primary consumer, but through the whole of the food chain.
Okay, I'm conscious of trying to get as many people in as I can at once. The microphone is now with Hazel, and Anthony next door wanted a word as well. So both of those.
Thank you, Bill. After your webinar, which I watched, I went down the consumer route. Sorry, Hazel Bentle, Hearts and Beds.
Trying to find you, right?
Sorry. I went down the consumer route and I contacted both Waitrose and the co-op and I asked them what their policy was. And both of them said their policy was for their own brand meat that it would always be pre-stunned, whether it was halal or not. Now, the thing that mystifies me is that they don't make these as public statements, as consumer attractants, because to me that'd be an excellent marketing move. Consumers want labelling. They're in a position to be able to label it. And the mystery to me is why those particular supermarkets don't actually go down the route of saying, well, hey, we're here, we're doing the right thing. Have you any idea why they don't?
I think Asif might have put his finger on it earlier, in that if you keep quiet about an issue, then it's not an issue. If you start making a song and dance about it, you actually may get some of your customers to actually think that they're not getting what they thought they were going to get. And you end up increasing the demand for halal rather than slowing it down in a perverse sort of way.
Thanks, Bill, for the great presentation and for the great webinar that you gave. I noticed, sorry, Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet. I noticed, I was looking through some old vet records from 1987, and there was an editorial on, non-stun slaughter at that point. So it's obviously a long, long history, a bit like Sean's thing. RSPB were trying for 20 years. There needs to be a new impetus. I'd be interested just to have a straw poll of people in the room. We collectively have a lot of clout, obviously working with the BVA, but it may be worth everybody writing to their MP and get their opinion, because until we really raise the profile, the only way to do that sometimes is going through the MP's mailbox. So maybe a little plea for people, if they haven't written to their MP yet, to do it, because it's such an important issue, and I really thank you for bringing it to our attentions, via the webinar.
Thank you.
Can I just highlight the last slide then? Lobby, lobby, lobby.
I know Kat's burning to come back on one thing, then I'm coming down to Lord Trees.
Yeah, Catherine McLaughlin, NFU again. There's a couple of quick points. If you're looking for a label, there is already one out there. It's Red Tractor. Red Tractor does stipulate that all its produce should be pre-stun slaughtered. So there's a good handy label to look out for.
But the consumer doesn't know that, Kat.
It's there in the standards. The Red Tractor doesn't hide from it on its website. The other thing that I would just caution, be very careful when you're looking at something from a UK point of view, that we don't just actually put this as an underground thing, which I think the lady behind me has already said, and all we end up doing is banning it here to import the problem from elsewhere.
I think that's quite right. We have to accept that and look at that.
The microphone down the front, please, now.
Thank you very much, Sandy Trees, House of Lords, and congratulations, Bill, for all you're doing in BVA. This is hugely important and hugely difficult. A comment first and then a question. On the restriction of freedoms in an open and democratic society, we recognise that one individual or one group's of freedoms can't be without limit, because they inevitably impact on other people's freedoms and rights. So, there are plenty of examples where we do draw limits to freedoms, be it organisations, individuals, whatever. So I would offer that as encouragement, and that's the way we should see this. Take the religion out of it, I totally agree, but it's about one group's freedoms conflicting with other people's freedoms. The question, though, is about labelling. I mean, that clearly is an intelligent and progressive way forward, but others who know more about this than me have suggested there are a lot more problems with that, technically and otherwise. I mean, are there real problems technically and so on with it? Is it a practicable way forward?
I don't think we should fool ourselves that labelling is a panacea. There are huge technical issues in following an individual animal right down to the final consumption when it's bought as a pack of mince or it's eaten in a restaurant. So technically following the animal is difficult. Never mind the problems you have about putting information on a label. When I was a board member of the FSA, we spent God knows how many hours discussing how much information we could get on a label that was 1 inch square. And if we want to have the welfare of slaughter, perhaps the country of origin, all the other information that we would like to go on to a piece of meat that was for sale or for consumption, we need to look very critically at how we're going to do it. It will not be a simple solution, but I suspect it's going to be the only way of getting a message across to the general consumer. The labelling might be a section of a counter rather than an individual piece of meat. I'm sure there are innovative ways to do it, but it will not be easy.